but the problem I have with that is that that same language from any cause actually is applicable in the 1953 Act, or 321. It states the same thing. So it clearly then moves on to a different set of circumstances, which it seems not to be applying to a vacancy that occurs during a term, but what happens when there is a failure to elect or a failure for a person to take office. And it seems that they outline two separate and different types of provisions. And so that's where I just, and again, part of the reason for the importance of this, I think it's important to know, is that, you know, no one has any horse in this race, so to speak. There's no grand conspiracies. All my major concern is making certain that we're applying the law and appropriately. And one of my concerns is if we have a situation now where we're being asked this evening to set a special election, and if they go to seek declaratory judgment of some sort after that, then people will have gone out and laid out specific expense to start their campaigns or to run if we don't have, again, some sense or understanding of whether we're right or wrong in this. Do you understand where I'm coming from on that?
Well, I do. I certainly do. But, you know, the way things work, I've reviewed it. I've asked others to review it. I've reviewed what Councilman McRitchie has submitted. And it seems pretty clear what was going on here, that it was the intention of prior city councils and the state legislature, when they modify the language, to say, look, irrespective of how the vacancy occurs, if it's a first-year vacancy, then it goes back to the electorate. And there's wisdom to that is as simple and compelling as the wisdom that Mr. Harris might put forth in support of his position. I mean, the fact of the matter is there are people here this evening who I know have expressed an intent to run for the office. They perhaps, had they known that Councilor McNamee, had he had the luxury of choosing not to run, as opposed to undergoing the circumstances he did, then perhaps these folks would have put forth their names on the ballot. So there's that dynamic in play, and then there's all the compelling reasons that Mr. Harris might raise. But the law is pretty clear and simple, and I think it's broad language. We saw back in 1984 that the legislature struck some language where the city council put in a more particular provision about Chapter 58 shouldn't apply to Quincy. The legislature struck that because they're saying, look, we already have broad sweeping language here. We start dropping in particular provisions and we miss one, then that leaves you open to the type of interpretive scenario that you are now concerned about. I think that the fact the legislature in 1984 struck the language about Section 58 submitted by the city council is very significant. It shows an intention for the type of broad language and broad application. And in the balancing test, it's a simple test of first year goes back to the electorate, second year we handle it through the council appointment. And my reference to the Acts of 53, back when Councilor Ramondi's position in Ward 2 became vacant, was more particularly to provide guidance about 53 does have some particular provisions that gave guidance to the council about whom they should select, that it should be someone from the ward. And those provisions weren't terribly inconsistent from anything else that was suggested. But it's the big thing with Councilor Ramondi that makes the 2011 opinion irrelevant to this consideration is that in 2011, that was the final 6 months of the term, that vacancy. So I use that language to provide you some guidance, but
well, I think that opinion the opinion was on target, quite honestly, at that particular point in time. So I'm not, I guess the point that I'm was asking is if there's two separate provisions under 321 that outline different sets of circumstances. You're stating the opinion that essentially this act of 2004 basically overturns what it refers to in the event of death or a failure to elect. That's your
Pretty clearly trumped, yes, as it says for any cause. It's very broad language, and the purpose is that council and the state legislature place an emphasis on when it occurs, when the vacancy occurs, and whether it should be returned to the electorate, the question of filling the vacancy. So
If we set this election this evening, in reliance on your opinion, that in no way impedes Mr. Harris from seeking relief.
Correct, right. The remedy here really is, I mean, again, if you don't set, then perhaps one or more of the potential candidates will go into court and seek an order that you do set. So I think you have very clear direction from the city solicitor, which under the charter means, I'm your counsel, I'm providing you direction here, and I think you should follow it. If a particular individual has a problem, they do have a remedy. They could go to Norfolk Superior Court for a declaratory judgment. We've been through that type of thing before. It can be done on an accelerated basis given the nature of the question here. And, we could handle it in that manner, that would be fine. But I think that for purposes of this body, that there's a path that I believe you should follow. I'm recommending you follow it, and it's a direct path for this body. You don't get involved in litigation, although you may be nominal defendants in a case like that. Really, once you set the date, which is all you're setting, the process of the election is turned over to the office of the city clerk. So that office would be the party to the action. I would say we couldn't move forward until court ruled on it. Frankly, it'd be terrific in a lot of ways if Mr. Harris were right. It would save us money. It would save Clerk Shea and his staff on the south side of the hallway a lot of time and energy, and that would be a good outcome, except probably in the minds of some of the folks who think it'll run. And I think the balancing test and some of the issues that are being talked about tonight have already been addressed by prior councils in the legislature, and that what's left of this council is to set the date, and if someone wants to challenge it, they can move forward and do so.
Becomes very difficult in this setting, obviously, for us to adjudicate the matter. I suppose we can decide for ourselves in terms of how we would vote for this. But I do know that the intent, it was one of the concerns in terms of 2004, obviously, is that we've had a number of elections where there have been folks who have ran that were less than serious. So it was put that way in terms of what they were doing, where in many cases they would have been that second automatic placement. I know that that's what gauged a lot of the thought. So it makes it particularly difficult when you have a solid person such as Mr. Harris in this particular situation. But as for myself, I have to admit that I'm kind of stumped in terms of the applicability as it relates to Chapter 321. Because it does seem to me that if we're talking about a vacancy, it's one thing. Councilor McNamee did not die in the midst of his term. He died in his previous term before and after an election. But if you're saying that you believe that, in your opinion, that the 1984 also includes that particular provision, that's your opinion, then I don't know where to go from there.
Well, I think it's the plain language of the statute. If you agree with me that the reason the Ward 6 council seat is vacant today is because Councilor McNamee died, that that's the cause of the vacancy, then the language of the special act makes it clear that the vote occurs during the first year if there's a vacancy for any cause. I think that the fact, the timing of the death, and all of that, it's all taken off the table by the language for any cause. You raise an excellent point, probably accidentally, but I alluded to this earlier. Well, the reason I say it is this. If we get into weighing and measuring, is this like a legitimate candidate or a foil or someone who doesn't belong in public office, so we're going to call a special election. That's the type of discretionary action that's been removed by this broad language. And it's broad and clear, and it's very simple. It focuses on the timing of when the vacancy occurs, not the cause of it or who the runner-up is. And back in 1953, did you start looking at those things? So, while I understand, and Councilman McRitchie certainly has submitted a very well-reasoned opinion, essentially what he did was he reasoned from 53 forward, and I started in 2004, because that special act is very clear. It says, notwithstanding the provisions of any special or general act to the contrary, which wipes out everything before. Well, what do you do if all that's wiped out? If a vacancy occurs during the first year of the term, which it has, for any cause, it happens to be the death of Brian McNamee in December, not post-January or not post-convening of this body. For any cause, there exists a vacancy and it should be filled by a special election. That's the first.
With fairness to Mr. McRitchie, I don't think he's starting from 53 and working forward. I think what he's saying is that the Act of 1953 is still applicable, which again you've acknowledged in other opinions as well.
Right.
That's
in part because of how I worked. Once I saw the language in 04, I was kind of done. But Paul Hines, I gave it independently to both Paul Hines and Janet Peckett and asked them to look at it and asked for independent opinions back. And one of the things Paul Hines pointed out is that we need to look a little more carefully about whether the enactment of the city charter didn't eliminate from any consideration this special act of 1953. Because in the city charter, I think it's section 11, it's one of the early sections, it says that any special acts, any prior special acts, anything else relative to the city of Quincy wiped out and now the charter governs. It does get into language about anything to the contrary. See, that's where I did reach back in the Ward 2 matter to give you some guidance about how to select to some particular language. But I think it's pretty clear here that the for any cause clause extinguishes the provisions of the Acts of 53 that Mr. McRitchie is relying on.
See, that's where and again, we'll start going in circles very shortly here, but the from any cause language exists in the chapter 3.
It does what?
It exists. I mean, it's the opening, it's the first.
What do you mean, that language is used in the act?
It says that if at any time a vacancy occurs in the city council of the city of Quincy from any cause, the city clerk then goes through. But the assumption under, it seems to me, on the face of it, is that that's talking about a vacancy that occurs during the vacancy of the specific term. And that is referring to any cause. And then later, it then begins to address failure to elect, which includes death, resignation. So to put it very simply, I mean, at the risk of sounding crass, and I don't wish to, but different things apply for a person who dies prior to assuming office in January 4th, and for the person who were to die after January 4th. But there's two specific different things that it seems to call for. So it's hard for me to see how just at the language from any cause eliminates that specific provision.
Well, how is that not a cause for vacancy?